For 30 years, I poured my heart into building something beautiful. At 65, I signed it all away for $1. My lawyer begged me not to. My accountant called it financial suicide. My daughter cried and said I'd lost my mind. But as I watched David's smug face across that conference table, pen in my hand, I smiled. Because what none of them knew was that 6 months earlier, I'd already made a phone call that would change everything. This is the story of how I lost my business and won my life back. My name is Gloria Hayes, and I've spent the last 3 decades building Hayes and Mitchell Fine Dining from a single storefront in downtown Chicago to a chain of 8 upscale Italian restaurants across the North Shore. When I started this business in 1994, I was 35 years old, recently divorced, and desperate to prove I could make something of myself. I'd always loved cooking, learned from my grandmother in her tiny kitchen in the old neighborhood, and I had a vision. Authentic Italian cuisine with a modern twist. The kind of place where families would celebrate anniversaries and businessmen would close deals. I met David Mitchell at a restaurant convention in Las Vegas. He was 23, fresh out of culinary school, ambitious and charming in that way young people are when they haven't been knocked down by life yet. He approached me after my panel discussion on restaurant management, told me he loved my vision, and asked if I was hiring. I saw something in him, that hunger to succeed. I hired him as a sous chef at my original location. David was brilliant in the kitchen. Within 2 years, he'd worked his way up to head chef. Within 5, he'd helped me open our second location. When I offered him a partnership, making it Hayes and Mitchell instead of just Hayes, I thought I was investing in the future. He put in sweat equity, I put in capital and experience. We agreed on a 50-50 split. By the time we opened our 8th restaurant in 2020, we were doing $10 million in annual revenue. Somewhere along the way, David changed. Or maybe I just finally saw who he really was. It started small. Little things I noticed but told myself I was imagining. Supply orders that seemed too high. Labor costs that didn't match the actual schedules. David hired his wife Vanessa as our marketing consultant at what seemed like an inflated salary. But I let it go because, well, she was his wife, and I wanted to be supportive. Besides, business was good. We were expanding, getting written up in Chicago Magazine, even featured on the Food Network. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of growth was making me see problems where there weren't any. Then came the morning that changed everything. I'd arrived at our flagship location early, around 6 a.m., something I rarely did anymore. I was supposed to meet with our new pastry chef, but she'd called in sick. I decided to check some inventory in the back office while I was there. The computer was logged into our accounting system under David's credentials. He must have forgotten to log out the night before. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But something made me click on the accounts payable folder. What I found made my hands shake so badly I had to set down my coffee. There were invoices from companies I'd never heard of. North Shore Restaurant Supplies, Chicago Hospitality Services, Midwest Food Distributors, Premium, tens of thousands of dollars, paid out monthly for the past 3 years. I checked our actual supply orders against these invoices. They didn't match. The real orders were about 40% less than what we were paying these phantom companies. I checked the business registration database. North Shore Restaurant Supplies was registered to an address in Evanston. The registered agent was Vanessa Mitchell. My heart pounded as I kept digging. Chicago Hospitality Services, Midwest Food Distributors Premium, 2 other shell companies I found, all registered to either Vanessa or David's brother-in-law, all billing us for services we never received, supplies we never ordered, consulting we never requested. I calculated quickly. Over 3 years, Approximately $800,000 had been siphoned out of our business into companies David controlled. I sat there in that back office, watching the sun rise through the window, and felt my entire world shift. This man I'd trusted, who I'd made my partner, who'd stood beside me for 30 years, had been stealing from me, from us, from our employees, our customers, the business we'd built together. I could have confronted him right then. Part of me wanted to, but I'd learned something over my 65 years on this planet. Anger is expensive, and patience is an investment. Instead, I logged out of the system exactly as I'd found it, picked up my purse, and drove straight to my lawyer's office. Patricia Sterling had been my attorney for 20 years. She'd handled my divorce, drafted my will, reviewed every major contract for the business. She was sharp, pragmatic, and didn't suffer fools. When I walked into her office that morning, without an appointment, still shaking, she took one look at my face and cleared her schedule. I told her everything I'd found. She listened without interrupting, taking notes in her precise handwriting. When I finished, she sat back in her chair and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Gloria," she said carefully, "what do you want to do?" "I want to nail him to the wall," I said. "I want every penny back, and I want him out of my business." She nodded slowly. "Okay, but we need to be smart about this. If you confront him now, he'll destroy evidence, move money offshore, lawyer up immediately. We need to build an ironclad case first. How long will that take? 6 months, maybe more." "Can you wait that long?" I thought about seeing David every day, pretending everything was fine, sitting through partnership meetings while knowing what he'd done. It made me sick, but I'd waited this long for justice in other parts of my life. I could wait a little longer. "Yes," I said. "Tell me what to do." Patricia pulled out a legal pad and started writing. "First, we hire a forensic accountant, quietly, someone who can trace every dollar without alerting David. Second, you document everything, every conversation, every email, every suspicious transaction. Keep a detailed log with dates and times. Third, you act completely normal. Don't change your behavior toward him at all. Won't he notice I'm documenting things? You've always been detail-oriented. That's your management style. He won't think twice about it." She paused. "There's one more thing, Gloria. Something that could make this much bigger than just getting your money back." "What?" "If the amounts are substantial enough, and if we can prove a pattern of deliberate fraud, this isn't just a civil matter. It's federal embezzlement, wire fraud, possibly money laundering. If he moved money between states, we could bring in the FBI." My eyes widened. "The FBI?" "There's something called the whistleblower program. If you report corporate fraud to the government and they recover money, you get a percentage of what's recovered. In your case, since you're part owner of the company he's defrauding, it's complex, but possible. And more importantly, David would face criminal charges." I sat with that for a moment. Criminal charges meant prison time. It meant destroying David's life, not just his career. Part of me hesitated. Did I really want to go that far? Then I thought about my employees. The servers, the cooks, the bussers, who depended on our restaurants for their livelihoods. The money David had stolen could have gone to their raises, their health insurance, their retirement plans. He hadn't just betrayed me. He'd betrayed all of them. "Do it," I said. "Build the case. Document everything. And when we have enough, we bring in the FBI." Patricia smiled, the kind of smile a shark might make. The next 6 months were the longest of my life. Every day, I went to work and acted like nothing had changed. I smiled at David across meeting tables. I approved his requests. I laughed at his jokes, and every night, I went home and documented every single interaction in a password-protected file on my personal laptop. Patricia introduced me to Tom Chen, a forensic accountant who'd worked on major fraud cases for the SEC. He accessed our business accounts through my authority as co-owner and began tracing every dollar. He found even more than I'd discovered that first morning. The total came to nearly $1.2 million over 4 years. Tom also found something else. David had been preparing to squeeze me out. He'd been negotiating with a private equity firm to buy the entire business, planning to sell without my knowledge or consent. He had backdated documents, forged my signature on preliminary agreements, created a paper trail that made it look like I'd been mentally declining and was ready to step away from day-to-day operations. When Patricia showed me those forged documents, I actually laughed. It was so audacious, so completely shameless, that all I could do was laugh. "He's been planning this for at least 2 years," Patricia said. "He was going to force you out, pay you a fraction of what your share is worth, and walk away with the whole business. Can we stop the sale?" Already done. I've notified the equity firm's legal team that those signatures were forgeries, and any deal negotiated under those circumstances is void. They've backed out completely. She paused. But here's where it gets interesting. David doesn't know they've backed out yet. He thinks the deal is still in play. I saw where she was going. So when he approaches me with his buyout offer, we let him make it. We let him think he's winning. And then we drop the hammer. 2 weeks later, David asked me to lunch at one of our newer locations, the one in Wilmette, with the view of Lake Michigan. It was a beautiful day in early September, warm with just a hint of the fall to come. We sat on the patio, and he ordered us both wine like we were celebrating something. "Gloria," he said, his voice gentle, concerned. "Oh." I sipped my wine, keeping my face neutral. "We're not getting any younger. You're 65 now, and I know the hours have been tough on you. I've noticed you've been tired lately, maybe a bit forgetful about some details." I almost laughed at the setup. Instead, I played along. "I have been feeling worn down," I admitted. He leaned forward, all sympathy and concern. "I've been approached by some investors who want to buy the business. Good people, fair offer. I think it might be time for you to enjoy your retirement, spend time with your daughter and grandkids. You've earned it." "What kind of offer?" I asked. He named a figure. It was about 30% of what my half of the business was actually worth. I pretended to consider it. "It's a fair market evaluation, Gloria. Restaurants are risky, and we've had some tough quarters." All lies. Our revenues had been climbing steadily. "I think you should take it. Enjoy your retirement while you're still young enough to travel, to relax." The condescension in his voice was breathtaking. He actually thought I was too stupid to see what he was doing. "What about you?" I asked. "What would you do?" "I'd stay on, manage the transition, make sure your legacy is protected." Another lie. He'd sell to the equity firm for the full value and pocket the difference. I set down my wine glass. "Can I think about it?" His smile was warm, encouraging. "Of course. Take all the time you need, but maybe not too long. These investors won't wait forever." I went home that night and called Patricia. He made his offer. "It's even worse than we thought." "Perfect," she said. "Let him think you're considering it." We're almost ready to move. 1 week later, Tom Chen finished his forensic analysis. The evidence was irrefutable. Bank records, wire transfers, email correspondence between David and Vanessa about the shell companies. Everything. Patricia packaged it all up and hand-delivered it to the FBI's white-collar crime division. Special Agent Jennifer Brooks called me 3 days later. She had questions. Lots of them. I spent 4 hours in a federal building, going through every detail, every piece of evidence. She was thorough, professional, and by the end of our meeting, she told me they were opening a formal investigation. "Miss Hayes," she said, "I want to be clear about what happens next. This investigation could take months. During that time, you need to act completely normally. Don't alert Mr. Mitchell to any of this. Can you do that?" "I've been doing it for 6 months," I said. "I can do it a little longer." She nodded, impressed. "You've built us a strong case. The documentation you provided is exceptional. Most victims of this kind of fraud don't even know it's happening, let alone document it this thoroughly." "I had good advice," I said, thinking of Patricia. 2 weeks later, I called David and told him I'd decided to accept his offer. Could we meet with our lawyers to draw up the paperwork? He sounded thrilled. "Gloria, I think you're making the right choice. You're going to love retirement." We met at a conference room in downtown Chicago. David brought his lawyer, a slick corporate attorney named Ron Berkowitz. I brought Patricia. David was all smiles, making small talk about his latest recipe development, asking about my daughter. The paperwork was straightforward. I would sell my 50% stake in Hayes and Mitchell Fine Dining to David Mitchell for the agreed-upon sum. He'd pay me over 5 years, structured as a retirement package. Patricia laid out one additional document. "This is a complete release of claims," she explained to the room. "It states that Gloria releases any and all claims against the business or David Mitchell related to her ownership stake or operation of the company." Ron Berkowitz looked it over. "This is standard. David, you'll want her to sign this." David nodded eagerly. "Of course." I picked up the pen. Patricia's hand covered mine, stopping me. "Gloria, are you sure? Once you sign this, you can't change your mind." I looked at her. She gave me the slightest nod. This was the performance we'd planned. "I'm sure," I said. "I signed my name on every page." David's smile could have lit up the Chicago skyline. "To new beginnings," he said, raising his glass of sparkling water. "To truth," I replied, and drank. It is a port. The meeting ended. David shook my hand, told me how much my contribution had meant to the business, how I'd always have a table at any Hayes and Mitchell restaurant. I smiled and thanked him, and walked out of that conference room with Patricia. In the elevator, she turned to me. "You okay?" "Never better," I said. Agent Brooks said within the week. "They want to coordinate the arrests with seizure of assets. Make sure David can't move money or destroy evidence." The call came 5 days later, at 6:30 in the morning. It was David, and he was screaming. "What did you do?" "What the hell did you do?" I put him on speaker so I could pour my coffee. "I'm sorry, David. You're going to have to be more specific. The FBI just raided my house. They have a warrant for my arrest. They're freezing all my accounts. Gloria, tell me you didn't do this." "Do what?" I asked calmly. "You reported me. You went to the FBI." "Oh, that..." "Yes, I did. About 7 months ago. Actually, right after I discovered you'd been embezzling from our business for 4 years." There was a long silence. Then, his voice low and venomous. "That paperwork you signed. You released all claims. You can't come after me now." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "Actually, David, that release covers civil claims related to the business. It doesn't cover criminal fraud, and it certainly doesn't prevent the federal government from prosecuting you for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. My lawyer made very sure of that when she drafted it. You can't do this. I'll fight it. I'll prove you're just a bitter old woman who couldn't handle retirement. Good luck with that. The FBI has 4 years of bank records, email correspondence between you and Vanessa about the shell companies, forged documents with my signature, and testimony from the private equity firm about your attempted fraudulent sale. Oh, and the accounting firm you used to create false reports? They're cooperating with investigators in exchange for immunity. Another silence. I could hear Vanessa crying in the background. Why? He asked finally. After 30 years. Why would you destroy me like this? That made me angry. Actually angry. For the first time in months, you stole from me, David. You stole from our employees, our business, everything we built together. You forged my signature, tried to force me out, and planned to walk away with millions while leaving me with nothing. And you have the audacity to ask me why? I took a breath, steadied my voice. I didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourself. Stay. After stay. I just made sure you faced the consequences. I hung up. The news broke that afternoon. Prominent Chicago restaurateur arrested in million-dollar fraud scheme. The story was everywhere. Tribune, Sun-Times, all the local news channels. They had footage of David being led out of his Winnetka home in handcuffs. My phone rang constantly. Reporters, former business associates, friends I hadn't heard from in years. I didn't answer most of them, but I did take one call. From Jennifer Brooks. Miss Hayes, I wanted to update you. Mr. Mitchell is being charged with wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. We've also frozen his assets and the accounts of the shell companies. He's looking at 15 to 20 years if convicted. What about the business? I asked. That's complicated. Technically, half still belongs to you and half belongs to him. But given that he obtained his ownership through legitimate means initially, we can't seize his share. However, we can place it in receivership pending the criminal trial. Patricia, who I'd conferenced in on the call, spoke up. Agent Brooks, what about the fraudulent transfer agreement Gloria signed last week? We're asking the court to void it based on fraud in the inducement. Mr. Mitchell induced Miss Hayes to sign under false pretenses, and the agreement itself was part of his larger fraud scheme. I'd say you have a strong case for getting it thrown out. And the money he stole? I asked. We've recovered about $900,000 so far. Some of it's gone spent on his mortgage, cars, his wife's credit cards. But we're still tracing assets. As the victim, you'll be entitled to restitution. After she hung up, Patricia and I sat in silence for a moment. How are you feeling? She asked. Honestly? Exhausted. But good. Really good. You know the business is going to take a hit from this publicity. I know. But we'll survive. We've got good managers, loyal employees, and the food is still excellent. Once people understand that David was the problem, not Hayes and Mitchell, we'll bounce back. And we did. It took time. Some customers stayed away for a few months, uncomfortable with the scandal. But most came back. They came back because our head chef, Maria Rodriguez, who'd been with us for 15 years, stepped up and kept the quality consistent. They came back because our general manager, Jason Wu, handled the media with grace and honesty. They came back because at the end of the day, people want good food and good service, and we still provided both. The criminal trial took 8 months. I had to testify, which was harder than I'd expected. David's attorney tried to paint me as a vindictive business partner who couldn't handle retirement, who'd fabricated evidence out of jealousy. But Tom Chen's forensic analysis was bulletproof, and the paper trail didn't lie. David was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced him to 12 years in federal prison and ordered him to pay full restitution, $1.2 million plus interest. Vanessa divorced him before the sentencing. She claimed she'd known nothing about the fraud. that David had controlled all their finances. The FBI couldn't prove otherwise, so she walked away free. Though her reputation in Chicago was destroyed, the court voided my sale agreement, returning my full 50% ownership of the business. David's share went into a trust, to be sold to pay his restitution and legal fees. I had first right of refusal to buy it. I did. I took out a loan, bought his half of the business, and became the sole owner of what was now just Hayes Fine Dining. We rebranded, simplified the concept, focused on what we did best. Within a year, we were doing better than ever. I'm 67 now. I still go into the flagship restaurant 3 or 4 times a week, though I've promoted Maria to executive chef and Jason to chief operating officer. They run the day-to-day operations while I focus on what I love. Developing new dishes, training young chefs, building something that will last. My daughter asked me once, during the worst of the scandal, if I regretted how I'd handled it. Should I have confronted David directly, given him a chance to make it right privately? I told her no. Some people, when you give them a chance to do the right thing, will use that chance to cover their tracks and hurt you worse. David had spent years stealing from me, planning to push me out. He didn't deserve mercy. He deserved justice. But more than that, I told her. This wasn't just about me and David. It was about standing up for yourself when the world tells you you're too old, too trusting, too naive to fight back. It was about refusing to be a victim just because someone expected you to be one. People still ask me about that day in the conference room when I signed away my business for $1. They ask if I was scared, if I worried the plan wouldn't work. The truth is, I wasn't scared. I was confident, not because I was sure we'd win, but because I knew I'd done everything I could to prepare. I'd documented every lie, traced every dollar, built an ironclad case, and I'd surrounded myself with people who believed in me and fought for me. Patricia, Tom, Agent Brooks. Most importantly, I'd learned something about myself. At 65, I wasn't too old to fight back. I wasn't too tired to demand justice. I wasn't ready to fade quietly into retirement while someone else took what I'd built. Last month, we opened our 9th location, this time in Oak Park. It's beautiful. Exposed brick, an open kitchen where customers can watch the chefs work, a wine room that's already getting great reviews. At the opening night, I stood in the dining room and looked around at all the faces. My staff, my daughter, and grandchildren. Loyal customers who'd stuck with us through the scandal. New customers who'd heard about our comeback. Patricia was there too. I raised a glass to her across the room. She raised hers back. To truth, I mouthed. She smiled and nodded. Some people might say I should forgive David, that holding on to anger will only hurt me. But I'm not holding on to anger. I'm holding on to self-respect. I'm holding on to the knowledge that when someone tried to take everything from me, I didn't just fight back. I won. And every time I walk into one of my restaurants, every time I see my name on the door, every time a young chef thanks me for giving them a chance the way I once gave David a chance, I remember I didn't lose my business for $1. I invested it in my dignity, and the return has been everything.